If you were flipping through Emerging Infectious Diseases magazine a few years ago, you might have come across an interesting article. It told about a letter that was sent from the island of Crete in the Mediterranean to Crete's overlords at that time in the most serene kingdom of Venice. This was in 1649. What they were reporting on was the siege of Candia, a city on Crete that was under siege by the Turks, and it was entering into its 5th year. This would end up being the longest military siege in history at 21 years. But at this point, the Venetians were still looking for a way to end it as quickly as possible, of course, on their terms. And the governor that was in charge of affairs on Crete sent a letter to the Inquisitore di Stato di Venezia. The Inquisitore was the intelligence services of Venice. They were feared, they were ruthless, they would stop at nothing. And the governor said that he thought he had come up with a method by which the Turkish power might be overcome. He had in his employ a doctor whose name was Michele Angelo Salamon, who had found a way to distill a liquid expressed from the spleen, buboes, and carbuncles of the plague-stricken. The idea was that this distilled liquid would be applied to blankets and textiles and silks, and then allowed to fall as if by accident into the hands of their Turkish enemy. Now, the challenge in making this plan work was to make sure that the enemy got infected without the people who were doing it getting infected and then spreading it to everybody else on the Venetian side. And as to why the plan was ultimately never carried out has been lost to history. But the fact is that Michele Angelo Salamon, by his idea, had attempted to undertake biological warfare. Does he belong on the list of what we're going to be talking about tonight? Oh, I think he does. Welcome to Jim's Friday Freakout. This time we're looking at evil scientists. Yes. Sometimes those scientists take an unexpected form. Now, let me say something. I'll try to shout over the lightning or thunder and lightning while I say it. That there are a lot of evil scientists out there who do things that are really truly horrific and the stuff of nightmares, but we're going to keep it a little PG-13 tonight. Something for a Friday night entertainment. So here we go. Oh, by the way, if you like what we see tonight, like and subscribe below. Hi, I am Werner von Braun. Well, he didn't exactly put it in those terms, but in July of 1944, that's the message that came across to hard-suffering people of Great Britain. They had survived the Blitz, the Nazi bombing attack that went on in 1940 and 1941 toward the earlier years of World War II. But by July of 44, that was over 3 years in the past, and it was a pretty sure thing that the Nazis were going to lose the war. And then Werner von Braun's innovation came along to bedevil the hard-suffering Britons once again. He created something called the V1. This was a weapon. The V stood for the German word for vengeance and also for retribution. How's that for a weapon created by a country run by a dictator who's a narcissist? It really was an amazing invention, and it could fly at about 400 miles an hour. It carried about a ton of explosives. It had some inner workings, the likes of which had never been seen before. It was gyroscopically aimed. Most importantly, it had a turbojet engine. So this was really the first cruise missile. Fortunately for the Britons, it had a range of less than 150 miles. So it had to be launched from Western France. And once D-Day arrived and the Allies pushed the Germans out of Western France, the V1 rockets could no longer reach targets in England. Although they could also be launched from the bottoms of certain modified German bombers, but those were even less accurate than the V1s that were land launched. So these, over the course of that closing year of the war, killed about 5,500 Britons. And Pinterest, it's just, you do a search looking for this stuff, and okay, it's awesome that you're giving people information, but ideas, like if you want to create your own flying bombs at home, tell you what, Pinterest, why don't you stick with awesome bookshelves and fantastic new taco recipes, okay? All right, so there is a V1, which are also called buzz bombs because of the noise they made. coming in on a target actually in one of its more accurate runs, landing pretty close to the heart of London. But one of the ways they could take these things down, it was pretty creative. Some of the British fighters weren't fast enough to catch them, but some of them were. And so they could shoot them down. Or the other thing they could do is a British fighter could fly alongside the V1. The V1 had those wings. Get the fighter's wing under the tip of the V1's wing and then just go like this, what would cause it to spin out of control and crash someplace with fewer people, God willing, than downtown London. But just when they seemed to be getting a grip on that plague, a new one came along. In September of 1944, London, and at that point, since the Allies had taken the western portions of Europe, Antwerp, which was an important port where men and material were landing for the conquest of Nazi Germany, started to experience the plague of the V2. Ain't that something? That is not the first cruise missile. That is the first ballistic missile. Let's look at a few stats about it. Okay, there were 3,170 of them launched against London and Antwerp between September of 1944 and the end of World War II. About a third of them reached their targets. And the cost of this program to the Nazi government was about $2 billion. In other words, it was about equivalent in cost to what it cost the US to develop the A-bomb. Now, these things, only about a third of them hit their targets. And the whole mass of them launched between September of 44 and the end of the war didn't do any more damage than one nighttime British bombing raid over the German heartland. So it wasn't really money well spent, and thank God for us, because if they had spent that money on conventional weapons, estimates are the Nazis could have put like another 24,000 planes in the air. So how good that the Nazi regime, which was, how did they put it, personality driven, was enamored of cutting edge weapons, weapons that could end the war quickly, weapons that were revolutionary. In this case, they were revolutionary, but you know, there is one other thing that can be said about the V2 rocket. It didn't use up any resources in terms of fighters going out to catch them or anti-aircraft guns being used to shoot them down, as was the case with the V1. You know why? That's why. There was no point in trying. Thank God the Germans didn't get the bomb. All right. Oh, and this is, look, I got to hand it to IllinoisScience.org or .com. I'm looking for pictures of these things, and I come across this article, The Strange History of Antidepressants. There was an element used in the rocket fuel for the V2 rockets that ended up getting taken after the war. It was unused. I guess it was in barrels somewhere in Nazi Germany. Was bought by Hoffmann La Roche, which is a New Jersey-based pharmaceutical company, and developed into an antidepressant drug. Isn't life strange? But anyway, you have sold me Illinois Science. I'm going to come back and read that entire article. All right, now looking at the idea of evil scientists. Now, Wernher von Braun stated that patriotic motives in the work that he did had outweighed whatever qualms he had about the moral implications of his nation's policies under Hitler. He said, "Science has no moral dimension until its products are put in use by society." Well, I don't know if that truism is intended as to exculpate him morally, but my view is no dice, Werner. You knew what your government was doing, and if you didn't, given your prestige and your position in that government, it was because you didn't want to know. Just to give you a small idea, the V2 rocket program, that's the more advanced one, ended up killing about 11,000 enemy, not most of them civilians, but that's another issue. That is only slightly more than the number of slave laborers who died in the production of the weapons on the German side. People from concentration camps, people captured in countries to the east that were then brought into slave labor and worked to death under horrible conditions. In fact, the German armaments minister, Albert Speer, in 1943, when he visited a secret facility in a mine shaft in the Harz Mountains, where he saw some of the production processes for the rocket fuel that ended up going into these things, he was so traumatized by the conditions under which the laborers were working that he had a sort of a mini breakdown, and they had to send him off on vacation for a while so that he could recover and get back to his work. There you are. only slightly fewer of your own people died making the weapon than the enemy died in its use. Yeah, Werner, I think you do have moral responsibility there. All right, nevertheless, in 1945, Werner and 100 of his fellow German rocket scientists were brought to White Sands, New Mexico to go to work for the US government. Eventually, Werner von Braun ended up having a very high position in NASA and was instrumental in creating the Saturn V rocket program, which was remarkable despite the fact that these programs had millions of individual parts coming in on time and on budget. What a strange world we live in, and that he helped to put us on the moon. There was a satirical song guy in the 1950s and 1960s named Tom Lehrer, and he had a song about this very subject. He had a song called Werner von Braun, and the lyric that I remember was, "Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department," said Werner von Braun. Okay, this lady, I'm not sure how to say her last name. She was a Hungarian noblewoman who lived in the late 1500s, early 1600s, and she was a rather cruel sort. One day she was beating a servant girl, and some of the servant girl's blood got on her Elizabeth's skin. Elizabeth noticed that her skin afterwards looked younger. This was the beginning of something awful. Elizabeth is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific female serial killer of all time. Eventually, her infamous acts, making sure that she got blood not only to apply to her skin, but to drink in an attempt to maintain her youthfulness, got to the word of the King of Hungary, who launched an investigation. And in approximately 300 testimonies from witnesses, they came to the conclusion that she was responsible for the deaths of about 1,600 people, common people, servants, noble women who were invited to her castle. So 3 of the people who worked with her ended up in prison. She herself was not in prison because they decided it would hurt the nobility. So she was kept under basically house arrest in her castle for the rest of her life until she died at the age of 54. Yikes. Okay. Oh, God. Yeah, you know, when I look for pictures online, I try to pay some attention to whether or not they're under any sort of copyright protection, whether I'm allowed to use them. But I didn't look so closely with this one because I'm not aware of a circumstance under which Kim Kardashian objects to her picture being used in any form for any usage, no matter what she looks like. And here she is getting a treatment. The blood. They draw blood from your arm, they centrifuge it, they apply the platelet-rich result, and they get a little prick that links in. You don't have an allergic reaction because it's your own blood, and that helps. God in heaven. Okay, Hans Joachim Pabst von Ohain. He is, according to the National Aviation Hall of Fame, enshrined there, since 1990. So let's break it down. He was a key figure in the development of jet engines. So there he is. His competitor was a guy named Frank Whittle, who was a member of the British military, but came up with a patent in 1929 for a turbojet engine. Now, Ohain also came up with one. In his patent application, Whittle's patent was cited, but it was considered to be distinct enough that they gave him one too, not until 1936. However, von Ohain had tons of money supporting his work, whereas Whittle had to scrounge for money. He ended up partnering with a company that put a severe cap on the amount of money that could be spent on this development. The British government came in and started to participate, and then this company that he was in business with started to develop a competing product at the same time and didn't tell him. So he had a much harder go of it in terms of making his invention come to fruition than von Ohain did. So doggone it, in 1939, von Ohain put the first jet in service in the history of the world. Whittle didn't get one up until much, much later. It was either the second or third jet to be in the air. Actually, it might have been fourth, come to think of it. But you can probably guess another very important difference between these two innovators. Yeah. Yep. Von Ohain was working for a regime that was enamored of new inventions, that was, as I said earlier, personality driven, and could do things at whim and throw infinite amounts of money at them, whereas Whittle was working for a government, especially in between World War I and World War II, it was extremely conservative. They said, hey, normal engines on planes work fine. We don't need to put too much money into developing these jet engines. Anyway, so that's the turbojet engine that von Ohain developed. It really is a marvel. It's amazing that anyone's able to do something like that. But these jets did see some service, of course. His patent was granted in 1939. And in some of the years after that, one of the most notable events at which German jets participated was the bridge at Remagen, which is pictured below there, when the Allied forces advancing into Nazi Germany, as we were defeating them at the end of the war, managed to grab this bridge before the Nazis could blow it up. And then the Nazis realized that they did not want the Americans to have a ready means of getting over the bridge. So they sent a couple of their jets. The one on the left there is the Arado AR-234 bomber, and the one directly below me here is the Me-262 fighter. Sent these to destroy the bridge. They did not succeed. Okay, and come 1947, von Ohain made what is now a familiar journey to the United States. He went to work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, got a number of U.S. patents over the course of a long career, and contributed to the development of jet engines in the United States. He died after a long illness in 1998 in Florida, and the National Aviation Hall of Fame said it was the end of a distinguished life. Well, I find that to be a little bit of a problematic concept when it comes to a guy whose first and most memorable work was working for Adolf Hitler. So I did a search. Wernher von Braun, with whom I strongly disagree, at least stated what his moral views were with regard to the people he was working for. So I looked up Joachim Pabst von Ohain guilt. This is as close as I got. Here's one of the Google results. And this is as close as I got to any reference to that. Missing, guilt, must include guilt. Well, I think people must include a sense of guilt, but perhaps von Ohain sees it differently. And I'm sure that his retirement in Florida was much more comfortable than the lives of a lot of people who helped to develop his jets. If you've enjoyed tonight's show, take a look at these credits. We'd love it if you liked and subscribed below, but so many free resources went into making this available to us tonight. This presentation template is by Slides Carnival. There are photographs by Unsplash. Some of this paper texture, which I love, is Graphic Burger. National Institutes of Health, always a fantastic source of scientific information. Giphy.com, Pinterest, Blitzlift, Air Force Magazine, Britannica.com, AviationMagazine.com, and the Smithsonian Institution. So thanks so much. So happy you could join us tonight. So check us out on Facebook in our free James Michael Riley Studios Facebook group. As I said, like and subscribe below, and consider supporting us on Patreon at Patreon/James Michael Riley. For as little as $3 a month, you can help to keep fresh content coming for laughs and inspiration 5 days a week. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us. Good night.